Hey.
Please state the name or number.
The Drive with Bob and Jeff. Dial 869-1240.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
The Drive on KFH.
Welcome back to Drive here on KFH Radio. We are beyond happy to be joined by Stephen Van Zandt. You know him as Little Stevie from the E Street Band, from The Sopranos, and there's a ton of other stuff that Stephen Van Zandt has done. Stephen, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Good to be here.
You're with yours truly and Jack Oliver. You're coming to Wichita, the Orpheum Theater, the 20th, with your Disciples of Soul and your Summer of Sorcery tour. Tell us a little bit about this show.
Well, it's probably unlike anything anybody's ever seen before. I can tell you that. It's a 15-piece band, big band. It's 5 horns and 3 background singers that are going to knock your eyes out, and just a very powerful show. Basically, you know, I wanted to write a record that was uplifting at this point. You know, I think things are so weird out there in the real world that we could use a little bit of a uplifting kind of, you know, positive, optimistic kind of party, and that's what the show is, really. We designed it that way to just basically for people to come and have some fun for a change, to get away from all of the strange politics going on and everything else, you know. So the record really translated very, very well live. It became a really great show that people are enjoying everywhere, and so it's a real, you know, it's very powerful rock meets soul music. You know, people come, it's a rock and soul music dance party. It's basically what it is. You know?
Well, Stephen, I see where you started playing guitar very early in life, of course, and you said one of the things that got you into that, of course, seeing the Beatles on TV, of course, the Ed Sullivan Show, but you also mentioned the Dave Clark Five, and that's always been one of my favorite bands. And I think the difference between the two, to me, of course, was that great saxophone that they had in the Dave Clark Five that could blow it out. And it seems like that Jersey Shore music, you always have horns in the bands, and that's what really gets people going out there.
Well, you know, I guess that's true. I mean, we I think the one thing that we have in common when we talk about that Jersey Shore sound is our connection to tradition, you know. When people were running away from tradition and in the early 70s and getting into, like, you know, glam and disco and progressive kind of art rock and stuff like that, you know, we just felt like, you know, there's more to be done with the basic traditional style. And I think the horns kind of represented that tradition that comes from that rhythm and blues and soul music tradition. So, yeah, we kept it, and we kept it with the Jukes, of course, and Bruce had Clarence, you know, this one saxophone. But and then on my first solo record, I kept that same sound I was using with the Jukes, which was 5 horns. And I've returned to it now. I returned to it 2 years ago when I came back with Soulfire, my kind of a comeback record 2 years ago. And we have now continued it with Summer of Sorcery. You know, it's the first time in my life I've ever done 2 records in a row with the same band. And it's really thrilling to me that I managed to keep this band together, because these days, man, it's hard to find. It's hard to find that kind of loyalty. So they're the greatest session guys in New York, and everybody wants them. And they've been staying with me. And you'll see what I mean when you see this band live. You know, it's blowing minds. You know, the longer you're together, no matter how good it starts off, the longer you're together, the better it gets. That's just how it is. You know.
Stephen Van Zandt, the Disciples of Soul in Wichita at the Orpheum Friday night. Yeah, you got to go see this show for sure. So many things about your career are interesting, but you go back so far with Bruce Springsteen, far before the E Street Band. Tell us about your meeting of him and how that came about.
Well, you know, after the Beatles kind of came, what we call the British invasion of '64, you know, the Beatles and the Stones and Dave Clark Five and, you know, all the great Yardbirds and the Who and the Kinks, all them groups came. Up until then, you know, no one had ever really seen a band. There were no bands. You know, there were instrumental bands, and there were singing groups, you know, doo-wop groups, and there were individuals, like, Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and those kind of cats. But there wasn't, bands that sang and played and then eventually wrote their own songs. I mean, that was quite an unusual thing. And so it blew everybody's mind when they saw the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and these people. It was a whole new kind of communication, So they have a band, but most of them kind of never got out of the garage. They wanted to be in a band, but they didn't quite have what it takes to get out there and actually play. So in our area, there probably was a dozen bands that got out of the garage, and I had one, and Bruce had one. Those days, if you were in a band, you were friends, because it was weird to be in a band. And like I used to say, if you had long hair in those days, you were friends. So if you were in a band that had long hair, you were best friends. That's what happened with me and Bruce. And we became really close because we realized as we started talking that me and him were really the only guys we knew for whom rock and roll was literally everything. It was our religion. And most people didn't quite feel that way. When an option came up, they took it, whether it was a job or, working with their parents or working with their father or working or going to college or going in the military, whatever it might have been, people took those options. And me and him were like, we don't have a plan B. This is it for us, we're just misfits and we're not fitting into society, no kind of way. So that really bonded us together.
One of the things about Steven Van Zandt, I don't know if a lot of people know about so much, but a songwriter, arranger, a producer. I mean, you founded Southside Johnny and the Asbury Dukes, of course, and also you worked with Gary U.S. Bonds. And to me, his later things that you produced and put together, probably the best things that he ever did. But how did you get into being the arranger, producer, songwriter when you were also playing in these bands?
Well, the different stages of the craft of rock and roll. I've done master classes in schools talking about this. There's the basic 5 crafts of rock, and one of the very early ones is analyzing records. When you're first starting out, you need to listen to records and analyze them and pull them apart and put them back together and see what each instrument is doing and what the chord changes are and why does that melody with that chord change have that effect on the communication, why does that make me sad? Why does that make me happy? That kind of stuff is a very basic beginning of how we develop our craft. So you're becoming an arranger without realizing it. You're starting to figure out what the drum part is. Why does the drum do that? Why does the bass player do that? And that becomes a very early part of the craft, and then you go on from there. I was a band leader early on, and I was the one analyzing the record. And you got to go to school just like anything else, man. With any other craft, any other profession, you got to go to school at some point and figure out the business you're in. Figure out what exactly you're doing. And so slowly I just became an arranger. I just had a natural thing for producing. I just felt I always understood the big picture, and I wanted to be the creative force. I always saw myself as a writer, producer, and being an arranger, it was just a big help, In the early days of rock and roll, there was an arranger at every single session. People have forgotten that, but that's like the great lost craft of rock, is the arranger. Some people were lucky, like the Beatles, to have George Martin as a producer who also was an arranger. But that was unusual. So along the way, I just kind of combined. Slowly, they kind of all become integrated. My composition, my arrangements, my production, all kind of meshed together. Pretty early on. I was experimenting on those early Jukes records. By the time I co-produced The River, I knew what I was doing. And River and Born in the USA, I know what I'm doing now. But you keep improving, you keep getting better. I mean, I think I'm better than ever right now. These last 2 albums I've just done, Soulfire and Summer of Sorcery, I think it's the best I've ever done, possibly. So you keep getting better as you go. But I did start off as an arranger.
Steven Van Zandt, our guest. Summer of Sorcery tour hits the Orpheum Friday night. I wanted to ask you this. You've worked with the boss, Bruce Springsteen. You've worked with James Gandolfini on The Sopranos, a crime boss. Working with those two guys, bigger-than-life figures, did you draw any comparisons between them? Are they similar in some ways?
Yeah, they were similar in that they were both dedicated to their craft, very much so. Were very single-minded. When they were determined to get something done, you got to be focused. And those two guys really were able to focus. And both very similar in terms of their personalities, very, very humble and very easy to get along with and very, very normal people. Jimmy Gandolfini came from being a character actor, and he never really adjusted to being a lead actor in his head. He always was a character actor. He always, in his head, was always the third lead or some kind of character in the film. So that really changed the tone of the set, when there's nobody really being a diva, nobody's being like that kind of prima donna, it really keeps the set very, very friendly, They're both similar in their dedication to their art, They're, both great inspirations to me, especially Jimmy, I was there learning a whole new craft. I never acted before in my life, so you would do a scene with Jimmy Gandolfini, you walk away a better actor. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, how did they cast you in this, Stephen? Because you hadn't been an actor before. How did they kind of find you and say, hey, that's the guy I want for that part? And when they approached you, did you want to be an actor? I'll try that out, or did they talk you into it?
David Chase had seen me induct the Rascals into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on TV. It happened to be the first time the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was ever televised, so just to show how destiny works. And he was just flicking around and stopped at that channel. I came on for a minute, kind of comical induction of the Rascals. It might be on YouTube somewhere. And he was just like, I want some new faces for my new TV show. And they found me through the corporate papers of my foundation at the time, because I had no record company, I had no publicist or anything like that. So they tracked me down and calls me up. He says, you want to be in my new TV show? And I said, geez, that's awful nice of you, but no thanks. I'm not an actor. And he was like, yes, you are an actor. You just don't know it yet. So I said, I got nothing better to do. And so I went down there and that's, and I got it, but it was a gift, man. It was a gift to be given a whole new craft at that stage of the game. And, of course, you never stop learning it, of course. You're always improving. But I took everything I learned on Sopranos and used it on Lilyhammer, which ended up being the first show on Netflix. And they did 24 shows in Norway for Lilyhammer, and I used everything I learned on Sopranos, man. I co-wrote the show. I co-produced it. I directed the final episode. So, Sopranos was a really, really useful, a great school for me.
And Lilyhammer airing on Netflix, I love that show, Stephen. It was very, very, very good. You've worked with so many people in music in your career, done so many things. Is there somebody out there that you have not worked with that you would like to work with? Well,
I just kind of rediscovered myself. So, I'm mostly interested in just exploring where my thing can go to now, because this Summer of Sorcery album was just a miracle to me. Soulfire from 2 years ago was a record that just happened by accident. We decided, let's do some songs that I've written for other people and make a record, and that was just fun. And I wasn't thinking past that, really. And then the Soulfire record turned out so good, we said, let's do a little tour. And then that was going over so good. Suddenly new ideas started to come to me. And I said, man, if I'm going to do a new record, I'm going to come back into the business here. I want to do it differently. I want to do it very differently than I did in the 80s. Because in the 80s, man, all my records were very political and very, very autobiographical. And I want to get away from both of those things. And that's what Summer of Sorcery turned out to be. It turned out to be exactly as I hoped it would. And it's a bit of a miracle, honestly, because I wasn't planning on coming back into the business, and suddenly I have the major artistic breakthrough, and I might have made the best record of my life. And people are going nuts over this record, and they're going over crazy over the show. And I was like, none of it was planned. So, I'm kind of rediscovering myself at the moment. I don't really have any other artists that I particularly would want to work with. I shy away from working with my heroes if I can help it. Ironically, I ended up doing the Sun City record with 50 of my heroes. That was the whole other thing, the whole South Africa project that we did in the mid-'80s that brought down the South African government. But up until then, I always avoided my heroes. I didn't want to meet them. I figured, geez, if they turn out to be jerks, I'm not going to be able to listen to their music ever again,
Right.
So I didn't want to meet anybody, and then I ended up producing 50 of them for Sun City. But mostly, I just kind of avoid that stuff, I don't really have a need to work with anybody at this point, other than the E Street Band and my own Disciple of Soul.
All right, Stevie Van Zandt, we are so happy to have you. We made it through about a third of our list of questions, so maybe we can get you on again someday to get the rest of them asked. But been a real treat for us. Thanks for being on.
Well, thank you, man, and please mention the fact that teachers are welcome to come to the show for free. We have a music history curriculum right now at teachrock.org that is free. Over 150 lesson plans are there available for teachers to use. It's a wonderful tool for teachers to use. And we put aside 500 tickets every single show for teachers to come. The first to do is register with Christine at teachrock.org. And they can bring a friend and come to the show for free. Because, we just don't show enough appreciation for our teachers. And so we always do that. We put aside tickets for teachers and invite them to come to the show for free. So make sure you mention that, okay?
That's awesome. Friday night at the Orpheum, you can go see the Disciples of Soul with Stevie Van Zandt. Stevie, thanks so much.
Yeah. Come back and say hello.
We will. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right, there's Stevie Van Zandt. Again, they're in Wichita this Friday night. The Disciples of Soul Summer of Sorcery Tour, and good to catch up with him. We've got another musician up next from the band Kansas. How about that, folks? 2 back-to-back music interviews. Billy Greer, bass player for the Kansas, joins us next, The Drive on KFH.